Federation of German Waste, Water and Raw Materials Management Industry. Peter, thank you so much for hosting us this afternoon, and over to you for some opening thoughts.
Thanks, Jackie. Good afternoon from Berlin, ladies and gentlemen. As president of FEAD, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you at today's online event on the role of waste to energy for a more circular economy. The purpose of our event is to provide an overview of the possible development and challenges of waste to energy in the European Union in the context of the Green Deal and the transition to a circular economic model. As a current issue, the potential impact of the taxonomy regulation, the classification of sustainable economic activities, and its delegated acts by the European Commission will be elucidated. The event aims at showing that waste-to-energy operations are an important part of the circular economy. They play a key role as an enabler to more recycling and safe treatment of non-recyclable waste while recovering valuable energy, metals, and minerals. To be clear, the waste management sector, FEAD, we are fully and 100% behind the European Commission's Green Deal and the goal of a true circular economy. We also firmly support the order of the waste hierarchy and of course prefer recycling to recovery. We definitely have to avoid more waste. We have to recycle more waste. But from our point of view and practical experience, there still will be waste that cannot be recycled for the foreseeable future. A study from 2019 based on Eurostat data concludes that we will have an amount of around 140 million tons of residual waste in the European Union which need to be taken care of in 2035. This compares with treatment capacities of around 90 million tons today. Right now, for this type of waste, thermal treatment with recovery is the best available option. The current situation in the European Union regarding waste-to-energy recovery varies greatly from one member state to another. There are member states within the EU which have no waste-to-energy plans. Other member states have a long history in and well-developed network of waste-to-energy plans. We know waste-to-energy recovery is not CO2 neutral operation during the actual thermal process. On the other hand, it saves large amounts of methane, which is produced when waste is landfilled. This methane is a greenhouse gas that is about 30 times more potent. In addition, fossil fuels can be dispensed with for the production of electricity and heat. Unfortunately, the alternative to waste-to-energy recovery is not simply more recycling, but in reality, more landfilling. This is currently well illustrated by the increased landfilling of waste in the United Kingdom. The reason for this is now hampered possibility of shipments to countries with waste-to-energy plants such as the Netherlands, Sweden, or Germany. For about 30 years, waste-to-energy was seen as a necessary pillar for the development of a sustainable circular economy. With the introduction of the 5-level waste hierarchy and the R1 energy efficiency requirement in the Waste Framework Directive in 2008, a clear distinction was made from disposal treatment, such as landfilling or incinerating, without energy recovery. Still in 2017, the European Commission underlined the contribution of waste to energy embedded in the waste hierarchy to the circular economy in its communication, The Role of Waste to Energy in the Circular Economy. Since then, it has been observed that waste to energy seems to be losing political acceptance in Europe. That is even seen by some as an obstacle to the transition of a circular economy. For the waste management industry, this is a surprising change. This is reinforced by the lack of clarity with which the new taxonomy regulation addresses the issue. This regulation which through its delegated acts is intended to create a classification system that determines economic activities as sustainable, takes a very unclear position on waste to energy. If waste to energy is not classified as sustainable, but maybe even on the contrary, as environmentally harmful within the framework of a possible brown taxonomy, there is a risk that necessary private investments in plants will not be made without having established alternative treatment methods, leaving a gap between the needed and the actual capacity. In this case, the effects of the entire waste treatment sector would not be foreseeable. Although the classification of the taxonomy regulation will initially only apply to sustainable financial products, an expansion of its influence is already seen in other important policy areas, such as the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Waste-to-energy plants are large investments for which operators need planning certainty. From the point of view of the waste management industry, such certainty is necessary in order to be able to plan for the entire waste recovery chain in the long term. Waste-to-energy is an essential part to achieve the circular economy and requires, due to the intensity of investment, a solid legal and investment framework, which policymakers are called upon to provide. So I look forward to interesting contributions and exciting discussions today. And with that, back to Brussels to you, Jacki.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter, and lots to discuss. So why that apparent, as you say, shift in political acceptance of this issue? What is the reasoning behind that? Why is it so important? You've already underlined it. We're going to hear from our presentations now, the impact, the potential impact of that decision in the taxonomy regulation not to treat it, not to include it in the list of activities. Lots to discuss. So thank you very much, Peter, for getting us started. As I say, we're going to have a series of short presentations just to address different aspects of this issue. Then I'll introduce the rest of our panel and we will launch our interactive discussion. So it's first my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Christian SUHL, who works for PricewaterhouseCoopers in the practice group State Aid Law and Waste and Water. And he's going to talk more about the taxonomy regulation and a legal approach to all of this. Christian, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. And over to you, sir. And I know you have some slides. We're going to put those up for you now, and you just indicate when you want them to move on. So
okay,
thank
you very much, Jacki. A warm welcome from me to everybody as well. Well, on behalf of FEAD, PwC, which I'm working for, has prepared a legal analysis of the status of waste to energy under the taxonomy regulation. And I have been asked to briefly present the result of this analysis to you today. And I've been told not to speak for more than 10 minutes, and that's a real challenge for a lawyer, and especially if the analysis I should present is more than 60 pages long. So let's see if it works. Well, Peter KURTH already said something about the background and the aims of the taxonomy regulation. That saves me some time. Thank you very much. And as he said, the taxonomy regulation contains some references to the circular economy and the waste incineration. So the regulation says that an economic activity is sustainable if it makes a substantial contribution to one or more of the environmental objectives of the regulation, which are laid down in Article 9. And if it does not significantly harm any of these objectives. So, and among these 6 environmental objectives, there's a climate change mitigation, the transition to a circular economy, and pollution prevention and control. And if we look into Article 13, then it says that an economic activity contributes to the transition to a circular economy if it minimizes the incineration of waste. And another reference to the waste incineration can be found in Article 17, which says that an activity harms the circular economy if it leads to a significant increase in the incineration of waste. And next slide, please. This leads to the question, can waste to energy be considered as a sustainable activity? Well, the problem is that it's not really clear what is meant by waste incineration in the taxonomy regulation, because there is no definition of waste incineration in the regulation. And in waste management in practice, however, and in particular in the Waste Framework Directive, a clear distinction is made between waste incineration for disposal and waste incineration for energy recovery. So it has to be clarified what kind of waste incineration is addressed by the taxonomy regulation, and therefore the regulation needs to be interpreted, and that is what PwC has done in its legal analysis of September 11th, 2020. And believe me, the date is a pure coincidence. And in jurisprudence, if you interpret a law, you interpret it with 4 methods. And the first method is the interpretation according to the wording. It's a so-called grammatical interpretation. But this kind of interpretation is not very useful or fruitful for the taxonomy regulation, because, as I said, the term waste incineration is not defined, and it is used without any reference to neither recovery or disposal of waste. The second method would be according to the will of the legislator, the so-called historical interpretation. And the will of the legislator can be deduced from the legislative materials. Unfortunately, the amendments that have been tabled by the Council and by the Parliament with reference to the waste incineration, they don't contain any justifications or explanations. So we can't deduce really something from these materials. So this historical interpretation isn't very helpful neither. Then a third, there's interpretation according to the embedding of the individual law provision in the overall context, the so-called systematic interpretation. So you have to see or to assess the meaning of the provisions tackling waste incineration in the overall context of the taxonomy regulation itself, as well as in the overall context of EU waste legislation. And this systematic interpretation is very fruitful in the present case. And so since the time is very short, I will concentrate on the systematic interpretation. The fourth method to interpret a law is according to the meaning and purpose of the law, the so-called teleological interpretation, but I can skip this today because it's closely related to the systematic interpretation. Thank you. So the systematic interpretation, when we look at the context of the taxonomy regulation, leads to the question, can waste to energy contribute to the circular economy? And lucky us, the circular economy is defined in the taxonomy regulation. It is defined as an economic system whereby the value of products, materials, and other resources in the economy is maintained for as long as possible, blank, including through the application of the waste hierarchy. So I left something out, but this is very important, through the application of the waste hierarchy. And in Article 13, where it said when an economic activity contributes to the transition of a circular economy, it is pointed out that this is a fact if the activity minimizes the incineration of waste and avoids the disposal of waste, including landfilling, in accordance with the principles of the waste hierarchy. So we have 2 very clear references to the waste hierarchy within the taxonomy regulation, and that leads to the conclusion that distinction must be made between waste to energy and waste incineration for disposal. Because if we look at the waste hierarchy, which is regulated in Article 4 of the Waste Framework Directive, we have at the first stage the prevention of waste, followed by preparing for reuse, then recycling. On the 4th step, we have other recovery, e.g. energy recovery, and the 5th and last step is disposal of waste. So waste to energy clearly is on the 4th step of the waste hierarchy, whereas waste incineration for disposal is on the last step. And we also have to take into consideration that pursuant to the Waste Framework Directive, the hierarchy is flexible. So a deviation from the hierarchy is allowed or even required when life cycle thinking indicates that compliance with the hierarchy leads to higher environmental impacts. So in certain cases, the energy recovery might be even better than recycling. And a deviation from the hierarchy may also take place for technical or economic reasons. That is due to the principle of proportionality, which is a basic principle of law. So, as Peter KURTH has said, some waste might not be able to be reused or recycled due to technical or economic reasons. And instead of disposing of this waste, it is absolutely in the spirit of the hierarchy to use it for energy recovery and thus save some primary raw materials in energy production. So we come to the conclusion that waste to energy can contribute to the circular economy. Next slide, please. So, and then you can ask yourself, can waste to energy contribute to other environmental objectives of the regulation? Here comes into mind climate change mitigation and pollution prevention and control. So climate change mitigation, according to Article 10 of the regulation, the generation of renewable energy within the meaning of the Renewable Energy Directive contributes to climate change mitigation. Well, looking at the Renewable Energy Directive, we come to the conclusion that waste to energy from biodegradable waste produces renewable energy, because the Renewable Energy Directive says that biodegradable fractions of waste are renewable sources. So, looking at the pollution prevention and control, well, an activity contributes to pollution prevention and control if it prevents or reduces pollutant emissions into air, water, or land. And here again, waste incineration as such can remove pollutants from the material and economic cycle, and it prevents pollutants that might be contained in waste from being emitted into the environment. And moreover, the Federal Environment Agency in Germany has stated that the generation of electricity and heat in waste incineration plants releases fewer air pollutants, talking about arsenic, cadmium, nickel, and so on, than the generation of electricity and heat in conventional power plants. So once again, we come to the conclusion, waste to energy can contribute to climate change mitigation and pollution prevention and control. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, however, waste to energy must not be a harm to the circular economy. And when an activity is a harm to circular economy, that is stipulated in Article 17 of the taxonomy regulation. And that would be the case if the activity leads, for example, to inefficient use of materials or the direct or indirect use of natural resources. And if the activity increases the generation, incineration, or disposal of waste. Well, waste to energy would not lead to an inefficient use of materials as long as non-recyclable waste is incinerated. In that case, waste to energy saves resources as fossil fuels are replaced in energy generation. And it's not, well, waste to energy also does not hamper waste prevention and recycling, and especially would not necessarily lead to more incineration, because the question whether waste is incinerated for energy recovery rather than recycled depends on some other aspects at the beginning of the life cycle and of a product, for example. Even this has to be assessed whether a product and packaging, for example, are designed in a way that they can be reused or recycled at all from a technical and economic point of view. So the EU Commission itself says closed loop recycling starts at the beginning of the life cycle of a product. And another important aspect is the behavior of the consumers and waste producers. So from the consumer point of view, is there a demand for recyclable goods? Or so is there a market for recyclable goods? And from the waste producers' point of view, are they participating in sorting and separately collecting different waste streams so that they can be recycled or prepared for reuse? And last but not least, it's also a question of the framework conditions for waste collections, which are set by the authorities. So is there a separate collection for different waste streams, which enables waste management companies to recycle them? So in the end, we come to the conclusion, waste to energy does not harm the circular economy. So next slide. So the conclusion of the systematical interpretation is that insofar as the taxonomy regulation refers to waste incineration, a clear distinction must be made between waste incineration for disposal and waste incineration for energy recovery, which is waste to energy, and waste to energy that is made from waste that cannot be reused or recycled contributes to the transition to a circular economy, and it also can contribute to the other environmental objectives, climate protection and pollution prevention and control. So if waste to energy would be classified as an unsustainable economic activity under the taxonomy regulation, that would undermine the waste hierarchy, and the waste hierarchy is the basic principle of waste management in the EU. So to put it in a nutshell, from a legal perspective, waste to energy would have to be classified as a sustainable economic activity under the taxonomy regulation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Christian. Amazingly succinct for such a huge report. Thank you. We really do appreciate that. So lots to come back on this question of the definition and that lack of clarity that Christian was pointing to on this question of the role that waste to energy can and must play in the circular economy in achieving those other objectives. Lots to come back to in our discussion. Let's continue to build our picture though and provide more context before we launch the discussion. Now my pleasure to give the floor to Janek, Climate, Energy and Air Pollution Programme Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe. Janek, a very warm welcome. Again, I think you have some slides and we're going to operate them for you. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jacki. So let's just wait. Maybe while you're putting up slides, just a quick introduction. My name is Janek, and I work as a Climate, Energy and Pollution Program Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe. And I cover particularly topics of incineration, chemical recycling, and plastic to fuels. And for Zero Waste Europe, so we are a European network of communities, local leaders, experts, and change agents, and we are all working towards the elimination of waste in our society. We empower communities to redesign their relationship with resources, and we also support them in adopting smart lifestyles and sustainable consumption and patterns in line with the circular economy. So when it comes to maybe a quick reaction on what I just heard from Christian, I would really like to make 3 points. Can you just go back because that's not the first slide. Okay, it seems like the animation is not working. So anyway, I'm just gonna So I wanted to make 3 points. Actually, on the slide 2, there were 3 points plus the visual. So the first on the terminology, I think we don't have to go a long way. I think Christian, you made a good point that there is actually waste incineration is well defined. So we have when looking at what waste incineration means, we need to look at the current legislation, and it should not be redefined by the taxonomy regulation, because it doesn't make sense and it would just create incoherence with the current policies. So when looking at what waste incineration is, it's well defined in Industrial Emissions Directive, for example. If you look at the Article 3.40, waste incineration plant refers to any stationary or mobile technical unit and equipment dedicated to the thermal treatment of waste with or without recovery of the combustion heat generated, and so on. So it's very clear that waste incineration is well defined in the EU legislation, and this is what we need to refer to when we want to when we talk about waste incineration in the context of taxonomy regulation. If this is not enough, then let's look at the interpretation of waste incineration. Particularly, I would like to mention the technical expert group report on climate taxonomy, which refers to taxonomy regulation, and they say that according to the political agreement, any activity leading to significant increase in the incineration, including waste to energy of waste, is not considered an eligible activity. So it's very clearly that they again refer to the definition of incineration, including waste to energy, and the reason for that is for the exclusion is that it causes harm to the environmental objective of the circular economy, as per Article 12D of EU taxonomy regulation. But they make an exception, with the exception is for incineration of non-recyclable hazardous waste. And they also continue in the report saying that this exception was not original in the first report or in the Commission proposal. Therefore, the consideration of hazardous waste could be considered in a future taxonomy. And then maybe as a third point, coming back to there are further interpretations of taxonomy regulation, and I think the most recent one is the Commission guidance of to no significant harm, and as in the context of recovery and resilience facility. It's this 700 billion fund, which should help Europe to recover from the COVID crisis. And in there, they give an example 3 and waste incineration as a non-compliance with to no significant harm criteria. And under the description, which is now also you can see in the slide, they describe the measure as an investment to support the construction of new waste incinerators to increase the existing capacity in the country. And the aim of the measure is to reduce the landfilling of non-hazardous municipal solid waste and generate energy through waste incineration. So it applies also to waste to energy again. And I think this slide makes it very clear again that investment in waste incineration, including waste to energy, is excluded from the scope of, and particularly in this case, from the scope of the recovery and resilience facility. I would like to make another point on which could be useful in terms of looking at also the upcoming work on the new taxonomies. There was a report published end of last year, if I'm not wrong, either in October or September, which is called Categorization System for the Circular Economy, and the report was published under DG Research and Innovation. And there, again, they exclude waste incineration, including energy from waste. And they make a comment that majority of circular economy finance expert groups, which also includes experts from European Investment Bank, consider that resource efficiency gains from waste to energy, but also from waste to fuel strategies are fairly modest in comparison with other strategies, and particularly when considering the loss in economic value of potentially recyclable materials through incineration. And I would very much like to highlight this, that when we talk about incineration, we often say that we are burning non-recyclable waste. This is not the case. There's loads of reports out there finding as much as 80, even sometimes 92% of waste being recyclable at different scale. Yeah.
Briefly now, if you would, Janek.
Yeah, no. Actually, these are the main points. I can maybe just end up by saying that we also launched our own zero waste hierarchy, where we take into consideration the current thinking on circular economy, and where we also have reconsidered the role of incineration, which we put it under now as an unacceptable options because it creates lock-in effects and obstructs the transition to a circular economy, and so on. So I think these are the main points that I wanted to quickly react on the previous speaker on the report. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Janek, and lots to discuss. As you say, very much taking on those arguments that Christian made, and in some cases giving a very opposing view. We will come back on all of this a bit later, but I want to continue to build the picture before we do that. So I'm delighted now to give the floor to Markus HAUCK, who is CFO of EEW Energy from Waste. Markus, a very warm welcome, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Jacki. Also, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from my side. And since I only have 7 minutes, I start right away with my presentation. So, to set the stage, waste to energy is part of the solution, not part of the problem. Thermal waste processing is an essential cornerstone of a sustainable circular economy and a key contributor to the climate and energy policy objectives of the European Union. On account of their contribution to defined environmental targets, waste-to-energy companies should therefore be included in the respective taxonomy. EW welcomes the European Union's ambitious objectives of achieving climate neutrality by the year 2050 and of playing a pioneering role in global climate protection. We all together have to face this challenge and speed up our efforts to increase our level of ambition in order to reach these goals. So let me answer the question, and the question is, of course, what is the contribution of thermal waste processing to the environmental targets? And I think we already heard a lot. So I'll give you a brief overview from our side. And let me start with the first point. In accordance with strict legal guidelines and the respective waste hierarchy, and we heard the waste hierarchy today several times, baseload and low carbon energy is generated as electricity, heat, and process steam from non-recyclable waste. On average, we have more or less 50% of waste which in our bunkers, which is biogenic. The second point is waste processing plants also contribute to the hygienization and sanitation of the environment. And this is in particular true in COVID-19 times. We are currently incinerate a lot of medical and clinical gear caused by COVID-19 and prevent the development of climate damaging landfill gases. It is important to emphasize that the sector contributes to climate protection by way of diverting landfills and saves millions of tons of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. I have a number, I'm not sure, depending on the sources, but from my point or from our sources, we have a number that over 170 million tons of waste is still landfilled in Europe, and that would certainly be a very quick win. The third point, and that was also mentioned today already, we generate valuable materials such as ferrous and non-ferrous metals are recovered from our slag and essential elements which cannot be produced artificially, such as phosphorus, which is recovered from sewage sludge ash. Filter dust and ashes are also provided, that depends on the country, as substitute for building materials. So there are many applications here. Additional contributions to further decarbonize is carbon capture, carbon storage, and carbon utilization projects, as well as the production of hydrogen. This leads to innovative projects such as e-fuels, methane, methanol, and many applications are possible. And to give you a flavor, currently we are working at one of our plants on a green energy hub. And thanks to our regional presence, EW provides local support for energy transition together with innovative partners. We are actively involved in the transformation of a former conventional coal-fired plant, it's a whole area, into a sustainable power-to-fuel platform with green energy. And please note, there is only a few industries have CO2 and green energy available on one site. We are one of them. My last point is the taxonomy as such versus ICMA. And ICMA, that's for those who don't know, ICMA, that's the International Capital Market Association. And we believe a result-oriented taxonomy can promote a sustainable financial system in Europe and set international standards and support innovation. However, bureaucracy and rigid regulations can backfire and dilute the good intentions from the beginning. And if waste-to-energy companies are not included in the taxonomy, there is obviously a risk that access to capital flow might be blocked and major investors would turn away or funds get redirected. In addition, access to subsidies for innovative projects, which I just mentioned, might be blocked as well. In contrast to the taxonomy, the International Capital Market Association, ICMA, has included thermal waste processing in its list of categories of suitable green projects and has qualified it accordingly for the global market of green bonds. We at EW have already developed a green financing framework to issue a green bond, which is about to come in May this year, and the proceeds are used to finance various projects ranging from energy efficiency projects to innovative CO2 reduction projects. Sustainalytics, that's a green rating agency, has confirmed to EW that the green financing framework complies with the principle of green bond principles and is of the opinion that projects financed have a positive impact on the environment and will improve the sustainability of the business activities of EW. And my last point, Sustainalytics also believes that the EW green financing framework is in line with the general sustainability strategy of the company and that the green categories of proposed application of the proceeds supports the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discuss this with you. Jackie, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Markus, and thank you to you all. So we're going to launch our panel discussion now, and we're going to be rejoined by Peter, KURTH, Markus and Janek. So if you could please activate your cameras again and your microphones. And I'm also delighted to welcome Yoana YONCHEVA, Chairwoman of the Bulgarian Recovery and Recycling Association, BRRA, and Peter WESSMAN, Senior Legal Officer in the Directorate General for the Environment in the European Commission. I see we already have some questions coming in, just one to answer straight away in case you haven't seen the answer. Some people asking, will the presentations be shared? Yes, after the event, they will be shared with you all and they will be published on the FEAD website. Also, just a reminder, a couple of people putting questions in the chat. Could you please put your questions in the Q&A box because that's where I'll be looking for them a bit later on. So please, could the rest of our panel please activate your cameras and mics? So Markus, come back with us. Yoana and Peter, if you can put your microphones and cameras on now, that would be marvelous. Yoana, a very warm welcome to you. Great to have you with us. And Peter WESSMAN, I'm hoping I will see magically appear in just a moment. But while he is hopefully rejoining us, Yoana, can I come to you? We've heard conflicting interpretations of the role of waste to energy. Markus saying there very clearly at the beginning of his presentation, it's part of the solution, it's not part of the problem. That also argued by Peter, by Christian, but Janek challenging that and saying, no, it contravenes the do no harm principle to the circular economy. How do you see it, as a recycler, how do you see its role?
Well, as a recycler, I would like to present a picture here from Bulgaria. And for the past 5 years, all the recyclers have been investing a lot of money in all 3 sectors, in plastics, paper, and glass. And altogether, all the companies here in Bulgaria, we recycle more than 150 tons of plastics. And we also recycle more than 200 tons of glass. And there is a specific plant that is built in Bulgaria to recycle dirty paper and also Tetra Pak. The problem we have is that we have a lot of waste left, and we do not have an incinerator in Bulgaria at the moment. We have 3 cement factories where we burn the left out RDF, and their capacity is 200 tons, which is 200,000 tons, which is barely enough to fulfill the needs of the recyclers here in Bulgaria. We also have, currently we have a procedure for choosing a company that will be able to provide incineration of RDF at the thermoelectrical power plant here in our capital, Sofia, and they're using EU funds. The problem is that the price that we pay for waste disposal is rising up each year. So we definitely are looking for this incinerator here in Sofia.
Thank you very much indeed. Peter, it was mentioned by Peter KURTH at the beginning. He said that waste to energy was, as he described it, a necessary pillar of the sustainable economy. He said for 30 years, there was a broad consensus on that. He said, indeed, he points out in 2017, the Commission again underlined its role. But now, he said, and I'm quoting, there seems to be less political acceptance in Europe. How do you see the role of waste to energy? We've had conflicting views about it. And is that perception right? That what's changed if it's gone from being part of the waste hierarchy and an essential element to now being viewed as something that does damage and therefore can't be allowed? Peter, you need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. And I've listened with great interest to very clear presentations from the speakers. And yes, indeed. If I may, can you hear me? Because
yes, perfectly. Carry on. Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yes. Well, of course. First of all, as you mentioned, we have the 2017 communication from the Commission, yes, on waste to energy in the circular economy, which is still valid, of course, in the sense we have made an analysis there, for example, mentioning that, of course, waste to energy can constitute a very advanced energy efficient technology. That is clear. Whilst we need to see, I think now when we're looking at the taxonomy and investments in new waste treatment capacity, it's very much in light of the we have taken a strict approach on incineration, including waste energy, in the taxonomy regulation, as you have noted, because it is in the light of what we require from member states today, in the terms of stepping up in the waste hierarchy. The waste prevention, of course, foremost, but also preparing for use and recycling, and the very ambitious recycling targets which are set out in the Waste Framework Directive have to be complied with by member states. So we are asking quite a lot from member states. And it's in this sense, in this perspective, that we have to look at the taxonomy regulation, and you have gone through it in great depth. I will not repeat what you have said in Article 17. It's clear that there is a narrow exception for incineration of non-recyclable hazardous waste. That is clear. But otherwise, it's a strict approach with a view to avoid this kind of lock-in effects and avoid that investments that would create infrastructural barriers to the achievement of these high recycling.
But Peter, what about waste that is not recyclable? If it's not recyclable, it's not hazardous, it's not recyclable, then surely, and we heard that figure that Peter KURTH gave at the beginning about the estimate being 140 million tons of residual waste by 2035, even with the stepping up in recycling, what are you going to do with the stuff that's not recyclable?
Yes, I have taken note of what you have said, but it's the text of the Article 17 of the regulation is clear that it's about hazardous non-recyclable waste. But it is true that we should look into. I've taken good note of what you have said, and I know, of course, this information that you provided, and we are examining and looking into it. But we have to respect what the regulation says, and there is a narrow exception which mentions hazardous non-recyclable waste. So it is in the light of the taxonomy regulation that it's a rather clear provision.
But these are, I mean, Peter, these are, as I understand it, draft. We've seen the first draft delegated act. They're drafts. The issue here is indeed that's what it says, and that's what's causing the concern.
No, sorry, I'm talking about the taxonomy regulation itself in Article 17.
Yeah. Janek, same question really to you, if I might, just about what will happen to non-recyclable waste if we say that it isn't eligible to qualify as a sustainable investment. We cannot invest in the capacity that Peter says will be needed for that residual waste. How do you answer that? Because the argument earlier was, okay, yes, we respect the waste hierarchy. We only do it when we can't recycle it. But there is a difference between incineration for disposal and incineration for energy recovery. How do you see that? And what would you say happens? We have more landfill? Is that a better answer in your view?
Well, thanks. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think there are different aspects that are important here. First of all, I think we need to look at the long term. So it's clear that we want to reduce the residual waste in the first place, and the Commission has just published last year Circular Economy Action Plan that will aim to halve the residual waste by 2030. So we're just talking about 9 years from now, and I think there's a lot we can do about it. So when it comes to what to do with the residual waste in the meanwhile, then we seeing that the current system doesn't work. It's really broken, outdated, because what is happening is that we are just moving waste from landfills to incinerators, and the effect it has is that we are seeing a lot of recyclables and compostables really being burned at the moment. So what we are proposing is that what we launched a report last year is something called material recovery and biological treatment sites. And it's important to consider, we are not only talking about circular economy, we are also talking about the climate emergency. We have a few years left in order to really cut down on our greenhouse gas emissions. So in taking into consideration the issue of the need to move towards circular economy, the climate emergency, and also the issue of flexibility in the system, that really helps us to move towards a more circular economy. We propose the material recovery and biological treatment sites, basically looking at residual waste as a source for materials where you can still use for recycling purposes. As I mentioned before, there's a number of studies there showing that up to 92% in case of UK was recyclable. So our focus really has to be move away from waste management towards resource management, and in order to minimize the impact of residuals management. So we need to consider all these three aspects, and the part which is particularly harmful to climate is the organic fraction, and this should be separately collected, and if not possible to separately collect, then it should be pre-treated, and anaerobic treatment actually is the best way for it. There are studies which show that it's up to 20 times more efficient way of getting energy out of biogenic waste than waste generation. So yeah.
Thank you. I want to give a chance to the industry to react. Peter, coming back to you first, and there's one very straightforward question from the audience from Ricardo Buntis, who says, in order to further contribute to the circular economy, do waste-to-energy plants plan to increase capacity? And I raise that now because the whole issue here, you've talked about, we have 90 million tons of capacity. The figure you gave for 2035, 140 million. So that would suggest we do need the investment. What do you say to Peter and to Janek about this concern over lock-in, that if you increase incineration capacity, you will increase incineration of waste generally, and therefore you will undermine the objectives of the circular economy and recycling targets. How do you answer that? Same question to you, to Markus, and then to Yoana.
Thanks, Jackie. First, I took the figures and numbers from Eurostat. These are not my figures. What I hear from all our members as FEAD from all over Europe, we definitely have to increase our efforts to recycle. And recycling means separate collection. Recycling starts with a good collection. And if you see how the member states are using and working with their obligation to build up a very convincing system of separate collection, I completely agree with Janek. There is much potential left. Lots of the material which is brought to incineration plants today shouldn't brought there because it is recyclable. Let me give you only one example from Germany. Since 2012, we have the legal obligation that the bio-waste from private households has to be collected separately. The reality 9 years later is that about 50% of the households don't have access to a separate collection bio system. And in our household, waste, which is brought to incinerations, we estimate that there are 3 to 4 million tons of bio waste, which shouldn't brought to the plants. I completely agree. I think if you ask to the situation in the different member states, it's quite different. In Germany, I think we hadn't opened, Markus knows it better, an incineration the last 15, 18 years. We expect one new plant in the next years, but others will finish their work. So, for example, in Germany, I don't see another capacities more. And this is the same in other countries, but in countries, some of them in Eastern Europe, where we still have a huge landfill situation and a market share of landfilling, which is not acceptable. I agree with Peter and Janek. We have to bring our potential to reduce CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think that this is possible without reducing landfill. But it would be a mistake to estimate that the material which is brought to landfills today is ready or recyclable in the whole amount. It is not. And what Yoana mentioned from the Bulgarian experiences from the recycling companies, also if you establish recycling procedure and processes, you have to keep in mind that there will some material streams left, and you have the alternative, landfilling or waste to energy. And this is the alternative and the question you have to ask, not today, but in 10 years. Where do you want to be then?
Okay. Can I just ask on a point of clarification? Somebody has asked, when you talk about the 140 million tons, that Eurostat figure that you quoted says, is that when you talk about residual waste, the questioner says, is this estimation for non-recyclables only, or is it a mixture of waste, recyclable and non-recyclable as a potential feed for incineration? So where is that figure coming from?
It's the Eurostat answer to the residual waste, which is not recyclable. But I agree with the questioner. In those materials, we have potential to reduce.
Yeah. As you said.
If we establish a better separate collection everywhere in Europe, we would be able to reduce the amount. And there is no dissent to our members which are running those plans. They know and accept it very well.
Thank you. I'm going to give Markus and Yoana a chance to point point on this point, and then come back to Peter and Janek on the question of whether separate collection holds perhaps a better key than excluding energy waste to energy recovery entirely, as is the case now. Markus, your reaction to what you've heard?
Well, Jacki, I think most of the arguments have already been said, but I'd like to point out one thing. It's that the waste to energy, we are not against recycling and sorting. The opposite is true. Again, resource management, Janek mentioned, very important. We really support the resource management. We have a real issue here, and we support the resource management. So I think it's at the end, and that's what I was trying to say, that the circular economy, it's not either or. I mean, we have all to sit together at one table and bring our efforts, bundle our efforts, and try to solve the challenges and the issues we have. And I think it's not an either or discussion. Let me point out or give an example of a biological treatment site and the implications with biological treatment, which we all have to consider. 2 years ago, I visited the plant in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, a biological treatment plant. It's a really big biological treatment plant. I think an investment of more or less 160 million euros. And the entire waste goes through this plant. It's a pre-treatment, several pre-treatment areas. 140,000 tons goes in, and 90,000 tons comes out. And the question is now, what do you do with the 90,000 tons that comes out of the biological treatment plants? Well, you have several waste fractions. One fraction, and this was also mentioned already today, goes into the cement industry. The cement industry, by the way, has, in terms of regulations, in terms of emission regulations, is not as strict as the waste to energy emission regulation. So 1/3 goes into the cement industry, 1/3 I think is a wood fraction, and 1/3 is shipped by truck to Vienna, 400 kilometers away from Ljubljana, and gets incinerated in Vienna. It's just one example which just does not make sense. And Ljubljana has a heat network, and this is fired by gas turbines. So they could have easily, if they would have attached a thermal treatment plant along to the biological treatment plant, they then could have basically have established a circle where they would have produced their own energy. I think this that would have been a great solution.
Thank you very much. Yoana, your reaction to what you've heard so far, particularly in relation to this issue, this concern about the lock-in effects. If you increase incineration capacity, the argument going that there will be less recycling when there could be more. Peter KURTH has said, yes, we agree there's a lot more potential, but still there will be non-recyclable waste that needs that we should use for energy. What's your reaction to what you've heard so far? You're muted at the moment, Yoana. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry for that. I completely agree with Mr. KURTH. Everything that he said, I can relate to that. As a recycler and a mother of 3, trust me, I do want my land to be free of waste. And unfortunately, that is not the case in Bulgaria. We have a lot of valleys that we have to fill, unfortunately, and that's what we do. And to me, incineration is part of the solution, and as a lot of small packages cannot be recycled. And actually, I was in a meeting about 2 weeks ago with Nestle and Mondelez, and they have been mentioning that a lot of waste is not being able to be recycled, and we have to find a solution. And landfilling is not a part of the solution, and that is my opinion. And I believe I would be supported by all the recyclers here in Bulgaria. And unfortunately, some member states, as Bulgaria, we are walking behind other member states. And separate collecting of wastes is far from the German or any other state, member state, and we will need more time to reach to the point where we can have better separate collection of wastes. So that is my point of view.
Thank you very much. Peter, just coming back, I want to just come back on one point that was made earlier by Markus, because there was also a question about it from the audience. Markus pointed to the difference between the taxonomy regulation, and he was citing the International Capital Markets Association, which does include thermal or waste processing as category that is suitable, as a suitable green product. And he talked about the global market of green bonds. Therefore, there is a debate about what the best way forward is. What is your reaction to that? And can you, is there an explanation from your perspective as to why there should be this difference of view, and that the EU has moved away from a view that the International Capital Markets Association is taking? And then to you and to Janek, this question of separate collection as perhaps the key that can unlock getting the benefits of energy, waste to energy, and making sure that those lock-in effects you're so concerned about don't happen. Peter first, and then Janek.
Which Peter are you asking?
Sorry, Mr. WESSMAN. Peter WESSMAN, sorry.
I was not sure either. So thank you.
Sorry, apologies. I
Thank you
forgot
for
we have 2 Peters.
clarifying. Thank you. First of all, I don't want to go back into, as I said earlier, we have a very strict interpretation in the taxonomy regulation, as you're aware, that we, in fact, that significant harm concerns all investment in facilities that perpetuate high treatment capacity for residual waste treatment, so incineration, and it does go hand in hand with our policies, all policies, because in parallel, of course, we have taken huge steps which are necessary to enhance separate collection. It's indeed the key behind proper waste management and high recycling yields and good quality recycling to have efficient separate collection. I might have missed, because it could have been the system did not work for a while, but I think you mentioned separate collection and what is being done, and I just wanted to add that of course for many years, even before the amendments of the Waste Framework Directive, we have been to all the capitals in the member states to investigate and assess the possibilities of separate collection, and seeing very good practices in member states for separate collection, and that it is indeed feasible to establish a good separate collection. And that's also where the 2018 amendments of the Waste Framework Directive come in, because they have really strengthened separate collection a lot in the new framework directive. And also, of course, we have also guidance documents to help member states with separate collection. We have recently published one guidance document, which is now our website of the Commission, the waste pages of the Commission. So this goes hand in hand with the strict approach on incineration, which we have, goes hand in hand in these efforts, of course, and but equally important. And it does not at all. It's a very consistent approach, and it's really in what we must do to support member states to transition to the circular economy as we see it.
But that point that was made earlier, I think it was by the other Peter KURTH, about the difference between member states and how much landfilling there is in some member states, and therefore what we do in the interim. You know where you want to get to, Peter WESSMAN, but in the interim, how are we going to reduce that massive amount of landfilling if we exclude waste to energy as part of the solution. Do you see, and somebody asking in among our questioners about the subsidy schemes, Eurostat shows discrepancies, says Vincent Demians, in amounts of landfilling. Can we expect different subsidy schemes based on countries where it is most urgent to act? So I just wonder whether within your saying, yes, we have decided on this strict approach, does it need to be nuanced more because the situation is so different in different member states?
No, the taxonomy regulation has been adopted. Article 17 is there, and we cannot deviate from that. I don't understand that discussion, because we cannot change. You cannot change the regulation which has been adopted by member states. The Commission has supported, and the member states have. You know, it is not possible. But I think indeed you are right that there is differences there is a lot to do, but for us the focus must be also on waste prevention and making efforts to change the current practices, which we have heard are not sufficient, and we must do more in order to step up in the waste hierarchy, do much more for waste prevention.
Sure.
Also this new operation, which in fact is something unique for the European Union, which is preparing for use, and so also above recycling. But of course, recycling has to be helped by separate collection, and that we are doing the utmost to do that. So I think these efforts go hand in hand.
I take your point about the regulations being agreed, but just one last question before I come to Janek. Dr. SUHL, Christian SUHL, talked about, in his legal analysis, he said, it's not clear, he says, in the regulation, when you talk about waste incineration, he says that he points out the Waste Framework Directive has this distinction between incineration for disposal and incineration for energy recovery. And he says there are clear references in the regulation to the waste hierarchy, and that this is part of the waste hierarchy. So even accepting what you say about the regulation is there, it's in stone, he's saying there's a lot that still needs to be clarified. And as we move into the list of activities under the delegated acts and so on, he's arguing for more clarification. Would you accept more clarification is needed? Just that question, and then to Janek, please.
No, the waste hierarchy is clear. It's Article 4 in the Framework Directive, but the definition of incineration it's in the Industrial Installations Directive. So we have a definition. It's not. It is sufficiently clear. We have the definitions.
Okay.
But I will take note of. I've taken note of what it's been a very interesting discussion and many good presentations. So I take a note of everything. But I cannot see the unclarity because we have the definitions in the Industrial Emissions Directive.
Thank you, Janek. Just coming back on this point about separate collection. And how absolutely vital this is, and Peter KURTH suggesting this is the way forward to make sure that everything that is recyclable is recycled, and not then to exclude waste to energy for what really is not recyclable. Would you accept that if you've got the separate collection absolutely right, and right across the EU, very different in different member states, would that answer your concerns about lock-in effects of incineration?
Well, no. And let me explain it. We, in our network, we work with over 400 cities that have established very clear strategies in terms of how to get to zero waste. And what we have seen is that cities that don't have incinerators, they are actually able to get better in waste management very quickly in just a number of years. So unfortunately, waste incineration does have this negative impact on recycling rates, and including waste generation rates. So we just to look at just an example. For example, in Denmark, they produce about 800 kilos of waste per person, and they have incinerators. So basically, what they do is they burn most of it. In zero waste cities like in Ljubljana, they produce maybe 300 kilos of waste, which is much less. It's less than enough, and they maybe landfill or even some of it. I know it's sent to Vienna for incineration. It's just a really small amount. So we have to consider this. It's not just about it's having a flexible system in place that really allows you to get better in waste management. And what we promote also is looking into what's end up in a residual waste, because by identifying the elements that are in there, we can tackle them even more. What happens with the incineration is it just takes the bag, it destroys them, it's gone. You can't really address the issue of getting better in waste management, and having a better resource management in the first place. So yeah, for us, it's that's why we published our own kind of approach, which has those elements. It's a low carbon. It looks into residual waste management, residual waste as a resource, and it keeps the system flexible.
Thank you, Peter. KURTH, you wanted to come in.
I had a direct question to Janek. Wouldn't you agree, Janek, that those member states which have the most established recycling and separate collection structure are also the states which have the incineration, the waste to energy plants?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we have seen, for example, in the case of UK, there was a report out just quite recently that in places where you had incinerators, you had a decrease in recycling rates. So you can't look at the national level figures. You have to look at who has the responsibility for the waste management and where it happens. So we work with the cities, and we see that with the cities where you have this flexibility, you're actually able to get better. But it's a whole system. You need to also align the subsidies, because there are too many subsidies going into, for example, waste incineration at the moment still, which drives waste management, including Renewable Energy Directive. So we need to change that in order to really tackle the residual waste issue. So I think we need to move away from discussing landfilling against incineration and need to start really tackling the residual waste issue, setting a target that targets the issue of residual waste generation and aligning the subsidies to minimize, to really minimize residual waste.
There is a question from the audience about, at the end of the day, says the questioner, it is a question of the policy and allocation of public money to investment. Do you as panelists think the policy supports waste to energy incinerators? Policy supports would necessarily decrease investment in recycling, in waste minimization campaigns and so on. So on the one side, if you support using money for waste to energy incinerators, if you include it in the taxonomy so it can access green finance, would that necessarily mean a downside on the recycling side? That would be, so if one wins, the other loses. But I also wanted to ask, and Markus and Yoana, perhaps, from your perspective, if this rigid, this strict approach that Peter WESSMAN talks about is maintained, if waste to energy is not allowed, not regarded as a sustainable activity, and this doesn't change in any way, what will the implications be? What does it mean if you cannot access green finance in this area? For you, Yoana, as a recycler, what are the implications of if we can't find a solution to address this?
Well, if you're not allowing us to choose, what do you suggest? That's my first question. Because if you put us, the recyclers, in a situation where we cannot manage to deal with the residual waste, what is your solution? Because obviously in Bulgaria, separate collection is not okay at the moment. And if you know, Bulgaria is one of the biggest recyclers here in the EU. So if you give us, if you don't give us a choice, what do you suggest? Because as I've been in this business ever since I was 16, I have managed to look through other member states, and I came to the conclusion that it takes about 15 years, one generation, to teach the kids to start separate collection. And in Bulgaria, this started just probably about 5-10 years ago. So we have a lot of time to go to reach other member states. So my question is, if you put us in this position, how will you help us as recyclers to be able to recycle more waste even though we receive waste that cannot be recycled. You know what I mean?
I don't know whether Janek or Peter, you want to react to what Yoana said? Janek.
Yeah, why not? I mean, just I really want to. I think there's a lot of confusion about what is really actually taxonomy about. It's not about saying that something cannot be financed. It just says what is sustainable, and I think this is really important because it says it gives a criteria for the activities that can be considered as in line with, for example, circular economy, with the climate mitigation, climate change mitigation, and so on. And it doesn't say that you cannot burn waste at the moment. I mean, it tries to pool funding to move away to help the transition. So
but it makes access to green.
So I think
access to green financing. You can't access green financing because it's not categorized. So it does inevitably reduce access to financing for these purposes. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And if I may, I think this is positive because what is happening is that we have had a lot of EU funds were invested in waste incineration. More than 100 facilities were built over the last 10 years, and this cannot be very sustainable. Let's just look at the the climate emissions, for example, coming out from waste incinerators. These have been doubling over the last 10 years. We are talking about really a 280% increase in greenhouse gas emissions from waste incineration. I mean, we need to really see like what is sustainable here and what's the direction we want to take. In my opinion, we have to make, as a first step, we have to, as I said, we have to stop talking about landfilling and incineration. We really need to make residual waste production, generation as expensive as possible to drive better design and to drive waste out of the system.
Okay, there's a question here from Andres Robello Hobart to exactly that point, saying usually waste incineration is far cheaper than material recovery and recycling processes. Instead of making waste incineration more expensive, for example, through CO2 emission taxes, what sustainable solutions are there to make recycling economically more attractive than incineration? It goes directly to your point, and Peter's waving his arms. I'll come back to you in a little while, Peter. I just wanted to throw that question into the mix. But Markus, on this question of the implications of all of this, Janek saying there, look, it isn't that you can't access finance, you just can't access green finance. What will the implications be for you of that? And this question that came out that I mentioned earlier about if you support waste to energy incinerators, does that necessarily mean you reduce investment in recycling and waste minimization? So, i.e., are we in an either or can we do a bit of both?
Look, I believe that the green financing and the sustainable financing becomes more and more an issue, and a lot of investors, and we see it already, they are shifting their gears towards green financing, and a lot of funds do not finance gray or dark black projects. They only finance green. Yes, it's right that that you still get the financing, but the financing will be certainly more expensive. I'm convinced about that. So the financing will be expensive, and then is the question whether a project will be financed if you are excluded of the green financing, because the green financing, I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's been growing for the last 3-4 years amazingly. I mean, it's billions of dollars and euros are going into the green financing, and we are running out of green projects. But you have also to consider waste to energy operations. We're talking about, depending on the sites, we're talking about investments of 150, 250, 300 million. So it's not pocket money. So you need to have a solid financing, and you need to have access to capital. Otherwise, it won't fly. And moreover, and I mentioned this also at the beginning, you need to have access to subsidies, especially if you go towards the east, if you go to Yoana, to Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, where you need subsidies, you need support, you need EU subsidies to build up the whole value chain collection if you wanna go away from landfilling. So that's certainly, from my point of view, that is certainly a disadvantage if we don't have access to the green funding. But just allow me one more comment to Janek's comment in terms of recycling and incinerators. If I understood Janek correctly, he mentioned that the more incinerators you have, the less is being recycled. I certainly do not see this relation. That would also mean, if we don't have fire stations, we don't have fires. I think it's not that simple. I think recycling and waste management is embedded in the society, and the consumer and the people at the end. They decide whether they recycle and how they recycle and what they buy. And I think this is also a very important point we have to consider at the end in our bunkers or in all the societies. The consumer, the people who live there in the country, they produce the waste.
Thank you very much. Yoana, can I ask you to pick up on this question about instead of making waste incineration more expensive, says the questioner, what sustainable solutions are there to make recycling economically more attractive than incineration?
Probably we should start at the producers of the packaging, because I have been coming to a water bottle that has 3 different types of plastics in it. Maybe if they use only one type, it will be much easier to recycle, and maybe then we can start being more productive in this position. So we have a lot of things to discuss, and as I see it is, if incineration just disappears, the recyclers will be punished this way instead of the producers, that they don't manage to give a little more money to make this packaging more recyclable, because it's been very hard to divide the bottle cap, which is polyethylene, or the PET bottle. So this is that's what I think. Maybe we should turn to the producers instead of the recyclers.
Thank you. Peter, a comment to that, if you would, and also to just on that point that Markus was raising in relation to what the implications are if you cannot access green finance in this area, how you see the implications. And then we have a number of questions which I'd like to put to Peter relating to if certain things happen, might that change the way that waste to energy is viewed? But we'll come back on those in a minute. But Peter first.
Thanks, Jackie. First, let me support what Yoana said before, because the Commission is quite right. In the policy, we have to strengthen the instruments for recycling. The Circular Economy Action Plan means the main point will be a new product policy, minimal content, for example, eco-design. All those points, producer responsibility, like Yoana mentioned, is the main point. And I really see the context between the different treatment ways. If you make one way more expensive, then the interest for the other way, for the other treatment way increases. If you make it, if you make it legally impossible, then you have the impact to the other ways. And I agree with Janek in some important points, but not in the one that we shouldn't see the different treatment ways in an economic context situation. We have to see the whole level and then decide what we really want. And if we want, and we really support this, to reduce the climate, the greenhouse gas emissions, to save the climate, the way should be clear to more recycling. And what Markus said, I think is quite right. If the framework and policy of the European Union makes waste to energy more and more problematic and uninteresting, it will be difficult to find a way to financial possibilities. And I think we should discuss this relatively early at this development. Peter said we have to accept what the regulation says, right? But there is the implementation still coming, and we have some challenges here to bring them together. The climate goals, the recycling goals, and all those points together. And this is what we try to sublime with this event today. We have to see the context. We have to see a fair legal framework for the different treatment ways, and then decide what are the main goals. And our main goals is save the climate, do whatever circular economy can deliver to protect the climate.
Thank you. Peter, I mentioned, please do react on that, but I also mentioned a number of questions relating to, for example, would capturing CO2 and using it, for example, for methanol production or another use, be likely to change the status of incineration in the circularity framework? Another person, Markus Sebastian Hall, puts it, how does the Commission see the combination of carbon capture, storage and waste to energy? Do you recognise the substantial potential for negative emissions? A number of questions in that area. Would it change? So if we get carbon capture and storage right, would that change the way you see this issue? Or do you believe not? The strict approach would still apply. Peter Wesson, thanks.
Thank you. Certainly, I would like to underline that carbon capture and storage is extremely important and plays a very important role. That is clear also in our policies. But I have not an answer to your question how that would affect this, or whether there is indeed such a conflict. I do not see that. But I've noted what you have said. I cannot answer that now. But what I would like to point out, and I think it's important also to underline, is that very much lies down to the planning of waste management. And it's true that there could be difficult situations in many member states, but this has to be solved by proper waste management planning. And that is not to be forgotten that our legislation, we have requirements in our legislation for member states to adopt waste management plans, and which now they did have to be updated with the new waste framework directive, and we are now compiling the notifications for member states of the waste management plans and assessing them. And I think there it is about the waste hierarchy, which is the foundation for those plans. It has to be taken into consideration very carefully, and how to achieve waste prevention and preparing for reuse and recycling and meeting the targets that should be part of these national and regional and also in some cases local waste management plans. So this is a binding agreed obligation in all member states of the European Union. So these plans will help to support a proper waste management, and the transition to the circular economy will be helped by this proper planning, waste management planning. It is very important, and I think in that respect, the waste hierarchy is binding. Of course, it's legally binding. It has to be taken into this planning, as well as it's taken into consideration in our legislation. Thank you.
But that takes us back to Christian Schulz's argument, which is, given the regulation refers to the waste hierarchy, he would say that by ruling out waste to energy, you are going against the waste hierarchy. But we've been there already. But Janek, I don't know whether you could comment on this question of if we get carbon capture and storage right, would it for you change the equation at all? Would it for you change at all how we perceive waste to energy recovery?
Well, unfortunately, I actually, because this issue is new, and I see industries asking more and more because they're becoming more aware about the greenhouse emissions emitted by the plants. But I don't think it's really a solution, because I mean it could actually further exacerbate the lock-in effect. The problem is that the more expensive the plants become, the least interested you are in divesting from those plants. And this is a real problem because we are in contact with cities who like to move away from waste incineration, but they have a contracts, 5 to 10 years to pay back the costs of incinerators. So it's not something that you can just move away. So if you're going to make it even more expensive, it's going to be even less likely that you're going to divest from it. So we are really talking about, I think, in my opinion, we have to make waste incineration more expensive. So we're going to disencourage the waste producers to provide this kind of waste that cannot be recycled.
But just to pick up on that question, someone asked about what about looking at sustainable solutions to make rather than making one more expensive, make recycling more economically attractive than incineration in other ways. Are there other things that could be done as well, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, so is that the question for me, yeah?
Yes, please, yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, mechanical recycling is not very competitive at the moment. There is a very little investment has happened over the last 10 years. Now, if we are starting to ask for recycled content, it's becoming more interesting. But until now, it's been, for example, incineration is often less expensive than recycling. So it's kind of makes economic sense to not to be interested in recycling everything. So I mean, we need to put the subsidy schemes in place to really make recycling more competitive.
Thank you. And there's a question from Mark Thiele, not sure how to pronounce this. Janek talks about MBT and MRF plants for residual waste instead of waste to energy because of the lock-in effect of waste to energy. But what about, says Mark, the lock-in effect of MBT MRF? These plants also need long-term waste contracts that could potentially undermine recycling and reuse instead of treating it as residual waste in MBT MRF plants. Can you pick up on that, Janek, as well, while you have your mic unmuted?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think the person is confusing the MBT plant with the MRPT. So MRPT plant is a new concept that we launched last year. There are MBT plants that are moving towards material recovery and biological treatment sites, but there is no really full-scale MRPT plant at the moment. When it comes to the comparison in terms of lock-in effect and so on, then MRPT plants are compatible with separate collection. They can actually treat, because they do the same function. They take the waste and it has a sorting equipment to sort out the materials that can be used for recycling, and then it takes the biological part and treats it in order to be safe for landfilling. Okay. So it's compatible, and you can scale it up depending on the needs, and you can invest more in technologies that are needed according to the needs. For example, if you find out that you have a lot of paper ending up in there, you can invest in recovering more paper. Okay. And so on.
There's one other detailed question. I'm not sure who can pick up on this. Pier Giorgio Rosso asks, he says, solid residue, slag and ashes, constitute about 25% of waste to energy plants feedstock. 10% will shortly be the maximum amount allowed by EU for landfilling MSW residues. Therefore, the theoretical maximum amount of MSW allowed to be thermally treated, are you following me, is much, less than 40%. He asked, could you comment on this and report on working experience of ash recovery in other industrial supply chains? Can anybody help Pier Giorgio with this one? Wave at me if you can. And if not, no, there's a bit of a hesitation here. I think we'll leave that one sitting. There's lots of very detailed questions coming in. We don't really have time to delve into all of those. I did just really want to come back, Janek, and just one other thing we haven't talked about, which is energy demand. So we're focusing here on what do we do about with the waste, and what's the waste hierarchy here. Some people say, yeah, but we need to be really innovative in how we meet energy demand. It's going to increase significantly. And this is a way, waste to energy, that's a way of meeting energy demand in an innovative way. What do you say to that? A thought from you and then from the others on that issue. I'm turning it a bit on its head because I'm just interested how you see that argument.
Yeah, so I think that two aspects. to it. First of all, I mean, we have more than 500 plants in Europe. And how much energy do they produce? 1%. So it's clearly it's not a solution for in terms of energy. It's very little energy that waste to energy plants produce in Europe. 1% we are talking about. So it's extremely insignificant. And actually, what it does, because of its very high carbon intensity, it actually undermines investments in renewables, because it's often subsidized. So I mean, I would not think of it as an important source of energy. Waste is not a really good fuel in terms of producing energy. Secondly, I mean, when it comes to where we can have the best savings is really higher up in the waste hierarchy. I mean, if you want to save on energy, let's do more reuse, even more recycling. That's where we save really energy.
Peter, please come in on this point.
Yes, I think it's a little difficult to take the numbers of the plants in Europe and then saying, okay, how much of the energy we need is delivered by those plants. The situation also here is different between the member states. And in some countries, for example, in Germany, we try to say goodbye to nuclear energy as well as to fossil energy in the same way. We have another percentage of the energy outcome from our plants here. And let me repeat the numbers I brought in the discussion with Janek on LinkedIn this weekend. You allow that. In Germany, we have 20 million tons of waste, and we have a capacity of our waste to energy plants from around 23, 24 million. This is a little more than 5%. I think this number is still too high. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't think that everything what is brought to incineration, what is brought to waste to energy today, should be brought there. I want another effort to strengthen separate collection and recycling. But till then, we definitely use a possibility. We need a possibility for those materials which are not. And then at the end, also those plants can deliver a certain percentage, not a really huge potential. This is for sure as renewable energy for our energy policy and energy.
So for you, we need at this point, as you say, we need to address this. We cannot just say, well, the strict approach doesn't work, because how are we going to get from here to there? That's your view. Markus, a final thought from you on the way ahead. Where do we go from here? Same question to all of you, and then I'll hand over to Valérie PLAINEMAISON to close. Markus first.
Jacki, thank you. I'd like to also spend a thought on your energy question. I mean, we, with our plant fleet, we are very regional, and we play on for the region a very even bigger role, and this role gets bigger and bigger in terms of energy, and we have to differentiate energy. It's electricity, it's heat and steam, and we provide our customers with lots of process steam. Sometimes we sit in chemical parks, and we deliver the chemical park with process steam or heat, and we are really an important energy provider for the region. So the 1%, yes, it's a number, but you have to differentiate, and this also depends on the country and on the region. So I really like to emphasize this, that we are also playing a role here. And in terms of CO2, you always can ask yourself, well, what's the alternative for producing the energy? It's a gas turbine or a coal-fired plant. And then you can start the calculation in terms of CO2 emissions. So that's why we believe, and that's why I believe it's, so you have to look at from an entire, the entire package. and not just the energy side or the disposal side. So you have to see together. So that was my comment. And
a final thought on where we go from here.
I believe that was a very good start today, that we kicked off this discussion, and from you know, the discussions, I'd say we need to do this on a regular basis. I think we have to exchange our thoughts and ideas, and I believe it's you know, I think the solution, as I said at the beginning, it's we have to somehow bring everything together, and the goal, it's the same. We have to decarbonize. We have to decarbonize countries and the world. So I think we have to continue the discussion, and bring our ideas on the table, and I think then we can go forward, and maybe we're also then able to somehow adjust and optimize the taxonomy. I mean, Peter said it's all the member states, but I think we need room for adjustments. I think we need room for discussion, and I believe we have to continue the discussion to improve the taxonomy. And I think that was a good start today.
Thank you very much. Peter, you said you were going to take away a lot of these thoughts, a lot of these comments. Where for you do we go from here to address these issues and to achieve those really ambitious targets that the EU has set itself?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. It is ambitious legislation that we have in place, and our role in the Commission is to help and support to achieve implement this legislation. Of course, it's one of our main tasks alongside preparing new legislation is to make sure it's properly implemented, and in that support, provide support to member states. Of course, our counterparts in the member states, we are working closely with and making sure and discussing on the, now it's very important is the planning stages of waste management to make sure that it's correct and it goes well. And of course, this is publicly available, I think, to a very large extent, and of course stakeholders can provide input to in the different legislative processes, and we are very much keen to hear and take note and listen. As you said, I really found it very interesting, and what you have said, and of course waste to energy is indeed can be very advanced energy efficient technology, but in order for us, I think one of our main tasks in the Commission really is to provide as much importance as we can through guidance, and to work together with also our colleagues in the member states to make the planning proper planning in line with the waste hierarchy.
Thank you very much.
That's what we're focusing on at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Janek, a final thought from Yoana, and then I'll give Peter the last word.
Yep. So in terms of maybe next steps, Zero Waste Europe, we call for redefining actually the way we deal with residuals within a circular economy. So I think a very important step maybe is to start to set to ask the Commission to set a specific target for reducing the residual waste. I think this will really help. And then also looking at all the subsidy schemes to make the things the right thing cheaper, because at the moment I think it's unfortunately it's still very cheap to generate residual waste and also to manage residual waste. So we have to make it more expensive.
Thank you very much, Yoana.
Well, in conclusion, I would be very happy to actually have all of the sites invited into a discussion as producers and recyclers and Commission and everybody involved, because in this kind of situation, we can come up with a solution. And the way I see it from here, I don't want any landfilling anymore here in Bulgaria, because if you have been here, you would know that we have a lot of land to fill, as I mentioned in the beginning. And It was a very good discussion, and hopefully we will be able to come to the best conclusion, but as well as reaching to the point where we can all attend this regulation and follow it instead of trying to hide things.
Thank you very much indeed. Peter KURTH, a final thought from you on the way ahead, and then I'm going to hand over to FEAD Secretary General Valérie PLAINEMAISON for a couple of brief remarks at the end. But Peter first.
Thanks, Jackie. The process which was started by the European Commission, the Green Deal, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the development of our economy from a linear to a circular one, brings a lot of challenges, and the biggest part of those challenges, they are in a context. They can't be solved separately. We should keep the whole sector in mind, and we should find solutions which fit to the whole process. This is very important, and as FEAD, we represent the whole waste management sector. We represent the recyclers, the collectors. We represent the companies which run the different plants and facilities. And we want to be more and more a platform where those different interests are seen and heard, and where we can discuss the best way to find partnership solutions. And that's why I'm especially thankful that we had the first time to hear with Bulgaria the view of a country which is not that developed in the different fields. And we want to cooperate also with the NGOs and of course with the different players here. We see circular economy as a partnership event. And so thanks a lot, and special thanks of course to Jacki, who is able to moderate also the most difficult discussions in a very friendly and sovereign way. Thanks from my side.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. And can I just thank all of you for a great discussion, a frank discussion, as a start of a conversation, hopefully not the end of one. So thank you, and thank you, audience, for all your questions. I managed to touch on many of them, not all of them. Some were too detailed, but thank you so much for those questions and comments. Let me just bring in now, very briefly, Valérie PLAINEMAISON, who is, as I said, FEAD Secretary General. You all know her. Valérie, if you activate your camera and your mic so we can see you. I know you wanted to say just a couple of things by way of closing.
Yes, I think it's activated. Can you
I
hear
can't
me?
see you. I can hear you. Ah, there we are. Now I can see you.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Jacki. So to finish, 2 times yes. Yes for more selective collection. Yes for more recycling. Yes for massive public support to selective collection and recycling facilities. Yes for strong pull measures at EU level to ensure a shock on demand for recyclates, such as mandatory recycled contents, product policy, eco-design, green public procurements. Having said that, the second yes is because green finance and circular economy has 2 legs, and we must fully ensure that the potential of energy and avoided CO2 emissions is tackled. So a second series of yes for a positive treatment of waste to energy in the taxonomy, which means clear, simple and strict conditions for eligibility of those investments based on 3 criteria. First criterion, the waste to be taken in those installations have to be waste after selective collection or source segregation or after recycling, residual waste. Second criterion, those installations have to comply with national waste management plans. There will be the instruments also to avoid lock-in effects. And third criterion, the installations to be eligible should comply with the lowest emission limit values of the Industrial Emission Directive. And also we should find a criterion that is simple enough to reflect avoided CO2 emissions compared to other solutions. This is the way to make it practicable and positive with regard to the whole circular economy. So having said that, now I need to associate my thanks to the ones of Peter KURTH, to Jacki, an excellent moderator, to all our panelists, Yoana, who joined us, Janek, who expressed the views of zero waste, Peter WESSMAN expressing the views of European Commission, Markus HAUCK, the views of the waste to energy operators. I don't think and Peter KURTH, of course, and thank you also our audience for the questions and for the interest. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much indeed, Valérie, and thank you for hosting us today. Such an interesting discussion.
And thank you to Christian Zuhl, who excellently presented the legal analysis.
Absolutely, and to all the team at FEAD and BDE who worked so hard to make this event the success that it has been. It only remains for me to wish all of you a very pleasant evening, and in the current climate, I have to say it, please stay safe. Take care and goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.